I'm Mark Markley, Senior Consultant at Search Technology. I've been an analyst for over 20 years, and today I'm going to share an approach for using VantagePoint to identify potential businesses or research partners. We know that it's best practice to start with the end in mind. Accurately formatting your research question first leads you to choose the best data source, helps you to hone in on the bibliometric indicators most appropriate for that question, and guides your data refinement strategy to ensure you generate quality output. Many of the webinars we use include guidance from Table 13.2 in the Tech Mining book, which lists over 100 research questions, as well as and what indicators to generate. In our case today, we're going to assume that we are a medical supply company. To answer the question, who might be a potential business partner, we're going to use PubMed, which is a relevant and appropriate source to help answer the question that we're proposing. What are the criteria of a good potential business partner? Well, we'll say number one, that they are working in our priority area of research. Number two, they may be working on early or proof of concept stages, therefore might be more eager to talk. And number three, their research is hot, meaning it's current and hopefully prolific. Knowing these are the questions we ought to answer informs our strategy to make sure that our affiliations are accurate in the data that we analyze, as well as having a good handle on the terms that indicate our research. My specific analytic approach in this case would be to categorize the information I have about the research field so that I can drill down to identify my priority technologies and what's happening in there using things like the VantagePoint concept grid. We'll also talk about refining, we'll talk about grouping, talk about list cleanup. Knowing the types of technology companies we're investing in allows us to make informed decisions with the data that we use. All right, let's dive in. Going to switch over to VantagePoint. And I've already gone through the import process, but I do want to talk briefly about that. Again, we're going to be working with PubMed data, but other data sources could also work. For this particular question, literature data is ideal because in many cases, scientific disclosure in a published article will precede filing for a patent on a technology. It's useful to note that PubMed is focused on supporting the search and retrieval of biomedical and life science literature with the aid of improving health. So it may not be applicable to every technology field, but it is certainly going to be useful for ours. I've already done my search in PubMed and have downloaded the export, and we're not going to focus on that. There are great online resources for searching and data retrieval within PubMed. But I do want to talk a little bit about the import process. Under the Home tab, if I click on New Analysis and use Import Filter, it is going to enable me to choose something that I have already downloaded for inclusion into the database. And the reason why I'm doing this is because while the system has a lot of good defaults in place to bring your data on board, it's useful to look at what other things we might want to import. So for example, there are default fields that are brought in, but if I click Show All Fields, one of the ones that we're really going to be spending some time on are the phrases which are generated through a natural language process during the import. So if I want to bring those in, I'm going to hold down Control and click the field and then click Finish. This is going to allow the data to import, but also to run a natural language processing step, which will break our abstract into phrases. So once the data is imported, we're going to look at the summary screen and see a number of fields that are available. Just a quick review, the field name, how many items are in each field, percent coverage, data type, and that sort of thing, which will enable some of the automated steps along the way. So remember, what the question we're trying to answer is, who are good corporate partners that we might want to work with? So if we look at the affiliation field, as it is imported directly into VantagePoint, it's not great. The affiliation field takes the information directly from the published document with no editing, no refinement, no modification whatsoever. So we're going to see things like Karolinska University Hospital, but we're also going to get Department of Neurosurgery. We're going to get Stockholm, Sweden. If we scroll down, we may see email addresses. We may see a lot of information that is just not particularly useful. We can certainly clean the entire field, and that tends to be something that I do. But since we're specifically looking for companies, what I'm going to do first of all is to group these affiliations into what type of affiliation are they. So if I click on the Refine tab, if I go up to Group with Thesaurus, and then click on Group Using Thesaurus, it's going to open a menu that allows me to, first of all, choose any items. In this case, we're going to do all, but also to choose a thesaurus. And the thesaurus that's of use here is the academic, corporate, government, or individual thesaurus. And if I click that and then leave everything else as is and click OK, it goes through and it searches all of the affiliation names for identifiers that help indicate what type of an organization it is. Certainly not 100% foolproof, and it really is up to the user to determine how much time they want to spend in this type of a process. So we can see that it doesn't really know what to do with Research Institute Davos, but it does have things like Karolinska University Hospital. It's academic and hospital. If I double click on corporate, it will resort and show me now all of the institutions that have been tagged as a corporate entity. But again, it's not perfect. We can see ASCULAP AG listed multiple times here. So we're going to need to do some additional cleaning. In order to focus on that, we're going to go up and we're going to create a field from the group items. Now I've already selected corporate. By selecting items, it's going to now create a new field which focuses entirely on items which have been tagged as a corporate entity. Now that I've got this, I can start cleaning my data. So if I go into my summary sheet, I see the corporate listing here. We can go into list cleanup from the Refine tab, but I prefer to do a right click on the field and then click List Cleanup. This automatically populates which field we want to clean up, gives us what the new name is going to be. And because this is tagged as an organization, it picks organization names. However, since I know it's PubMed, I am going to choose a different thesaurus rule set. Oops, pardon me. And choose the organization name, and I'm going to choose extract name. This is particularly well suited for non-uniform data, and even at the bottom it says, for example, PubMed. So it's going to do a little bit more work to try to pick up on all of those variations on the names within that set. Once we are finished with the initial process, it pops open the list cleanup grouping. This is a two-paneled group. So right now we see essentially the same stuff on the left and on the right. My process is always to use the right hand to do my searching and grouping, and the left hand is just a repository. So the first item I see is Globus Medical. I'm going to type in Globus, and it's going to give me a bunch of options here. So I can click things, select them, drag them into a group. So I've gone from a small number to a total of 23 that are listed as Globus Medical Incorporated, Audubon, PA. I don't need the Audubon, PA in there, so I'm going to right click on that, click Rename Item, get rid of that, and click OK. And now we've got a group with a better name. We can also see some things in here that might not be particularly useful. Consultant orthopedic surgeon, it is put together as a group. However, the fact that it is highlighted in green means that the system has grouped it together. And in this case, we probably want to take a look at it. And we can see that while they're all consultant orthopedic surgeons, they are from multiple different locations. So this isn't super useful. So I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to disband this as a set, and it gets rid of that automatic grouping. We may also see some other things in here that we know are just not relevant to our usage. So Osaka General Hospital, that might not be useful. So then I can go through and do remove item from final field. Note that list cleanup can be time consuming. So we recognize that, and you do have the option to save your session to finish later. So I can give this a name if it's the end of the day, and I can save and exit cleanup. And then when I start my workday the next day, I can pick up my cleanup exactly where I left off. Another time-saving feature that really builds up over time is the ability to save your cleaning as a thesaurus. So I will not finish cleaning in the interest of time, but if I want to save this as a thesaurus, it's going to allow me to create something that I can then apply to subsequent searches. It's really useful for things like organization name. So I'm going to cancel out of here because I've already done some list cleanup. And in fact, I'm going to go over now to a different file where we're going to talk about some additional cleanup. The next thing we're going to do is to look to do a series of categorizations that help to define our technology in specific technology subsets. There's many ways to do classification or categorization within VantagePoint. We do have a smart trainer that allows you to teach the tool what your categories are. You can go into a list of text and do searches and create groups. But in this case, we're going to use an automated process. But before we do that, once again, we're going to need to do a little bit of work before we run that categorization. We do see this phrases abstract NLP, but if I look at that field, there's a lot of things in here that don't look particularly useful from a categorization perspective. The abstract import, where we break the abstract into phrases, does do a little bit of cleaning, but mostly what it does is it breaks it up into phrases. Sometimes terms, sometimes phrases. So we see things like result, method, conclusion. None of these are going to be really useful for us as we're trying to understand how this technology is really broken down. So the best way to deal with that is through a refine NLP process. Refine NLP is going to allow us to choose the field and run some additional tools, including application of various thesauri, including some cleanup. We can also create our own list of words that we either want to preferentially exclude or include. And again, this is another way that you can save time on future work by building keyword lists that allow you to really fine tune the technology terms that you're going to be focusing on. Again, I'm not going to run this right now. I'm just going to cancel because I've already done it. But if we look now at the field that contains a refined version of the NLP, it really looks a lot better. These terms look more relevant in a way that allows us to understand how that technology is stratified within the different abstracts. So once I have this, I'm now going to go through and I am going to generate a concept grid. Concept grid is a tool that is designed to find sets of terms or concepts that appear with one another across multiple records. It does run a number of statistical algorithms. It can be time consuming. It really depends on how large your data set is and also the power of your computer that you're running the concept grid on. But it's not something where you're going to create concept grid and it's going to pop it out in 30 seconds. You're going to want to plan a little bit to allow this to generate over time. Now, I've already generated a concept grid. And if I look at that concept grid, it shows graphically a list of terms across the top, so our top level categorization, as well as terms that are within each top level. So within preoperative, we see stiffness, we see postoperative complications. This is great, and it's a nice way to look at your data. But what I'm really interested in are these top level categories. These categories are going to show up on the field that we did the concept grid on. So if we can turn our head to the side, we can see internal fixation, we can see preoperative, we can see inclusion criteria. I can go through and create a field from the group names and generate a brand new field, which after a little bit of cleaning, getting rid of PCD and dealing with capitalization, I've got a nice list of categories. So this list of categories is going to allow us to then get a real good detailed understanding of the technology that our potential partners are working on. There's one more thing I'm going to do before I start looking at some visualizations to help understand how that data is going to allow us to pick good partners. And that is to focus on that concept of, are people involved in human studies or animal studies? Mesh terms are a field which is specific to PubMed. This stands for medical subject headings, and it is applied by a team within the National Library of Medicine to help understand what technology is being described within the paper. And if I look at the mesh terms, we can see that there's a top level descriptor and in many cases a qualifier listing. What I'm mostly interested in here is humans versus animals. Now, once again, animals may be early stage animal studies, but could also be an indication that this is a veterinary application. So it's not 100% that if it's an animal study, it's early stages. It just might be people doing things that can benefit your family pet or a horse. So to do this sort of a grouping, I'm going to click on human. I am going to select all the documents within my title window. So all 7,414 titles are tagged with the human descriptor. I'm going to add these selected records to a group, and it's going to ask me to pick a field to tag that to. In this case, I'm going to use PubMed, and these are all going to be tagged as human. I'm going to do the same thing with animals. So I click on animals, I select all, I add those selected records to a group and click animal. Once that's done, as we've seen before, I can go to my PubMed ID. I can see that I have human, I have animal. I'm going to create a field from the group names. I'm going to use both of them. And now I've got a brand new field that I can apply towards the work that is going to help me understand what my companies are focusing on. There's a lot more fields that you can use and a lot more terms that can be applied, but for the purposes of today's discussion, this is what we're going to work with. So the first thing that I'm interested in doing is looking to see, given the technology terms that I generated earlier, what's the percentage of human versus animal studies? And a good tool for doing that is the multi-donut. Multi-donut is going to allow multiple donut charts in whatever fields that I choose. The first is going to be which is the donut itself, and the second is going to be how do we define the differentiation between those. So I'm going to do categories, I'm going to do my human versus animal, and I'm going to click run. And it's going to generate a quick matrix, and then it's going to pop open a window that shows me for screws, I've got 2011 records tagged as human, I've got 234 records tagged as animal. We're going to be talking about detail windows as we go, but I can add some in here just to show how this will break down, because all of the visuals that we create in VantagePoint are dynamic. So within screws, if I click on animal, we can see Fitzpatrick referral. is the most common corporate affiliation. And over time, now this is for everything in the animal listing, I've got a pretty good view of this. So this is a great way not only to help you identify targets, but it helps to cement in the mind of the people who you are then showing this to what information is relevant. One of the other things that we talked about with doing our research is timeliness. Are these companies new to the field? Have they been consistently publishing over time? What's a good way to look at that? One of my favorites is bubble charts. Bubble charts are going to essentially once again create a matrix, but they're going to give me a little bit more quick visual information in order to really rapidly identify what I'm looking at. So in this case, I'm not going to look at all the corporate institutions. I'm just going to pick, let's say, the top 6, and then I'm going to pick date published or year for the columns. And when I click run, once again, in the background, it is going to generate that work. And it is now going to show me the top organizations and what their publishing trends over time are going to be. So now from here, I can see that a company like Globus Medical, which has the most records over time, has also been pretty consistently publishing over the last 5 or 6 years. So we see a peak in 2020, we see another decent sized peak in 23, and even in 2024, we already see one publication. So this is a real quick, real easy way for somebody to look at this data and get a real easy to understand view of how this information may be distributing over time. The last visual that I'm going to show is the VisLink. And VisLink is found under the Analyze tab. There's a button for VisLink. And VisLink allows you to see 3 different visuals in one setting. I've already done the VisLink, so I'm going to come over here and open that up. So here I'm looking at my corporate institutions on the left-hand side. I'm looking at my categories on the top right and my affiliation country in the bottom right. And as I mentioned before, this is a dynamic view. So if I'm interested in looking at a company like Fitzpatrick Referrals, if I click on that, it's now going to show me all the categories that Fitzpatrick Referrals is involved in within my data set. It's going to give me, in this case, a pie chart of human versus animal. It's going to show me my date ranging, date publications over time, the authors that I've chosen, and what countries are the organizations that are publishing in this space located in. If I click back on that, it will refresh and go back to the top level. So I can do this across all the different organizations and really get a very highly detailed view of what companies may be of interest for me to approach from a technical perspective. Just one more thing that I want to do before we close the session is to talk about how do we convey this information to other people. VantagePoint is a great tool, and certainly you can have people crowd around your screen to get a look at what you're doing. But in many cases, you're going to need to take this information and put it into a format that can be quickly distributed through a quick organization. And I've just put together a very brief PowerPoint to show what this type of deliverable might look like. Certainly, this is not everything that might be included in this type of a process, but usually we're going to want to do an introduction. What are we doing? A methodology, including how did we do it? And then, because a lot of people like to have the end of the story before they get the detail, a list of potential partners. And in this case, I've included the company name, I've included the technical focus, which comes from the different categories I'm working on. And then in the notes, I'm distilling information that I got from multiple places. How many publications do they have? Do they have consistent publishing over time? I'm also going out to the internet and looking at the company website. So for example, Syntelix is a company that touts the fact that the bone screws that they put in will eventually be replaced by actual bone. So a real quick snapshot of something that somebody who's involved in business partnership or sales can look at and really understand quickly. And then for people who want a little bit more detail, I can put in some screenshots of the organization. So the screenshots, once again, aren't going to be live documents, but they can enable us to basically provide a little bit of validation for why did we draw the conclusions that we did with the information that we're providing. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this useful.